had the Wolves press conference being the most anticipated one of the season on their bingo card? I certainly didn't, but I tell you what, it's been a season full of surprises, and after the fallout that happened at Goodison Park, this was our first opportunity to sit down and ask Arne Slot some questions about exactly what went down between him and Michael Oliver. And well, the answer was mainly inconclusive. There was lots of things that he wasn't allowed to say. The process is still ongoing, but for those seasoned veterans out there were still a few nuggets of information that we can ascertain about exactly what we can expect and how long, if at all, Arne Slot will be unable to lead his team in the future. We spoke about the game of Wolves on Sunday, we spoke about the challenges that Wolves face, but most of the questions were still about that Goodison derby. He spoke about Curtis Jones, he spoke about the mentality that his team showed. I asked him about the disconnect between the midfield and the forward line, and he gave me some very interesting things to say about that. And you'll hear about all of them back in the lab. And here we are, once again in the lab. I am recording this a little bit later than anticipated. There was an unexpected medical incident at the AXA. I want to stress that everybody involved was okay. I'm not going to embarrass the subjects anymore by going into more detail, but I'm glad you're okay. Anyway, enough of all that, let's get on with the show. Now, there was some interesting team news. We learned something new from Arne Slot this morning. We heard about Trent Alexander-Arnold and the fact that he was always intended to play 25 minutes to half an hour against Everton, and he came through unscathed, which is interesting considering the nature in which he came onto the pitch at the point when it looked like Conor Bradley was possibly going to get a red card, but the way things were going. So it seems like it wasn't just a case of Arne Slot not trusting Michael Oliver not to give him a red card for something frivolous, but it was always going to be around that time that Trent came into the pitch. Anyway, he came through unscathed, which lets us know that he would be fit enough to start the game against Wolves, I expect. Now, there was another new injury scare. Cody Gakpo was also substituted in that game against Everton, and it was because of a knock that he had taken. I think if you remember in the second half, there was a tackle that he received in which he got up a little bit slowly from, and it does mean that he is potentially a doubt, although I think from just the way that Arne Slot spoke about it, the chances are he should be available, although this could mean that Luis Diaz ends up getting the starts and Gakpo is on the bench, which again might have been the case anyway. So, team news, still a relatively clean bill of health for Liverpool at this stage of the season. Only Joe Gomez is the long-term absentee. I do expect those other two to be back after this game, as will be Curtis Jones. We're speaking a little bit more about him later. But there was really only one place to start with this press conference. The first time Arne Slot got a chance to speak post-Everton. And he forms the very first top takeaway. Top takeaway number one. We still don't really know what happened with his meeting with Michael. Now, there's been lots and lots of conspiracy theories, ideas, lip readers getting involved, trying to find out exactly what went down when Arne Slot came onto the pitch after the final whistle and ended up leaving with a red card. Some people, myself included, believe that it was the aggressive handshake, or a handshake that was called aggressive. I'm not entirely sure it counts as an aggressive handshake. If Michael Oliver thinks that's an aggressive handshake, I wouldn't enter any arm wrestling contest anytime soon, Michael, if I were you. But the lip readers came up inconclusive as well. And unfortunately, at the end of this press conference, we kind of was in the same boat. No one really knew. All Arne Slot would mention is that there is a process that's ongoing, and for that reason, he couldn't go into details. However, he didn't entirely shut the conversation down. In fact, he actually challenged Alan Myers, the journalist who asked him the question, to find a different way to ask it, and he could have answered a few more questions. So clearly there's some things that he was willing to talk about around it, but I'm not sure Alan quite found the key to unlock exactly what Arne Slot wanted to say. He was particularly contrite. He did say that there were things that he did that he wishes he hadn't done in the emotion of the game. He mentioned the 98 minutes of the game on more than one occasion, which led most of us to believe that the time added on was one of the things that he was upset about, as well as what happened within that time added on. But again, because it's an ongoing process, Slot felt duty bound to not try to influence it negatively by coming out and giving us what he really thinks about everything right now. Now, the fact that this process is ongoing and the way that this hearing works tends to suggest that since we are already at Friday, that this hearing won't be concluded until after the game against Wolves. In fact, I'm under the impression that this will be concluded on Monday around about 5 o'clock, which is good news for those of you who got tickets to the Wolves game and want to see Arne Slot on the touchline, but may end up being bad news if he loses the verdict on this hearing and has a 2-match ban, as was originally mooted by the Premier League website, because those 2 matches are Villa away and Manchester City away. And there's a fine line as to exactly how much influence a touchline ban has. For example, a manager isn't allowed to stand on the touchline. He isn't allowed to go and converse with his coaches face to face, but he can speak with them on the phone. He can talk to his team at half time, and he can do press duties before and after the game. So, as much as it sounds like a touchline ban is going to be a really big disadvantage for Liverpool, I'm not 100% convinced it will be. I don't think it's something that's going to have as big an influence as maybe we've been led to believe. I could be wrong, but we'll have to wait and see on that. And what I can say, as I say, there's no guarantee of how this is going to go. We have to wait and see exactly what Michael Oliver's post-match report says. I'm not sure we're going to get the full idea of that either, but suffice to say, it's not something that Arne Slot seems massively concerned about, even if he did want to kind of toe the legal line, so to speak. Top takeaway number 2 is also focused on the derby. Spoiler alert, there's not going to be too much talk about Wolves in this, because there wasn't too much talk about Wolves in that press conference. I'm sorry for any of you who are out there who are watching from Wolverhampton wanting to know exactly what we think about you. It's not going to be today you find that out, I'm afraid. It'll be on Sunday. Anyway, top takeaway number 2. Mentality still matters. Now, Slot put a very high premium on the way that Liverpool fought in that derby, because he admitted on many occasions that they didn't play well. They didn't play to their best. He said that he felt like a draw was a fair result, even if at the time when you're going into the last kick of the game, it feels like you've dropped 2 points. And in a similar way to how it was away at Newcastle in this very similar situation, it's probably true. Liverpool got to a position where they were about to win, and so you feel like you've lost a win rather than gained a point. But over the course of the 90 minutes, or 98 minutes, so to speak, it was hard to make a case to say Liverpool were the better team and deserved the win. Now, using that word deserved often triggers a lot of people. It's like, that's not how football's decided. It doesn't matter if you deserve this or deserve that. When you're a manager like Arne Slot is, deserved kind of is born out of the performance. So how you play in a game and how repeatable that performance is game in, game out, game in, game out. So that's why he would potentially focus on that, and he has done previously. In this instance, the things that he's pleased about, the mentality, the fight, the way that the team came together and fought through very tough circumstances, when you consider the atmosphere, when you consider how Everton's style and application was basically set up to try and stop exactly what Liverpool were trying to do, and then all the stuff around it regarding the referee's decisions, etc., etc. He saw that he had a team of fighters. He saw that he had a team that was together. And after what happened against Plymouth, where there was a lot of criticism about those particular qualities, it was very heartening for him to see, and I think it should be heartening for all of us who are hoping Liverpool are going to go and do the business down the stretch of this Premier League season. Because there's going to be lots of opportunities for that mettle to be tested from here on out. Fair enough, going away to Goodison is going to be always difficult, and particularly the last ever Goodison game is going to be a really tough thing to have to navigate. But when you're trying to win a title, suddenly every game becomes that way. Like, there's going to be a high emotion and loaded narrative around home games with Southampton or home games against West Ham. The kind of games that if they're played in September, no one really makes that much of a difference. It's not really quite as important, but at that point in the season, it's all important. And so mentality matters. I think Arne Slot made reference on many occasions to what happened at Goodison last season and the way that he felt that Liverpool were improved and how their mentality improved. And if you think about the way the game bore out, there were lots of similarities. Liverpool went behind to a goal that came from a set piece that they really shouldn't have conceded from. There was points in the game where Liverpool felt like they were losing the physical battle, where every time they went into a tackle, the referee blew his whistle. And yet, they managed to get themselves into a position where, with 30 seconds left, they were winning the game. They were able to equalise, which they couldn't do the last game at Goodison, and that ability to be able to shake off everything that's fighting against you and still go out there and perform is really important. And the key point that Arne Slot mentioned again was this team are very hard to beat. And if you're Arsenal, you can maybe say, well, if they've dropped points here, they drop points there, we win this game, we win that game, we can claw it back. The reality is, they need Liverpool to lose football games, not just draw football games. And at the moment, that's still a very, very hard thing to say is going to happen. Because in the league, they've lost just one game. In games that matter, you could argue they've lost just one game. The loss against Spurs in the League Cup, irrelevant. The loss against PSV in the Champions League, irrelevant. The loss against Plymouth in the FA Cup may end up being irrelevant. At the moment it's not, but we'll see how that pans out. But the point being, he's got a team that is willing to do what it takes and knows how to fight when the going gets tough. And that is going to be almost as important as being able to go to Everton, play your football and win 3-0 comfortably. Top takeaway number 3. Curtis improved his standing. Now, he was hailed as a hero amongst the fan base for how he reacted to Abdoulaye Doucouré's inflammatory celebration at the full-time whistle. And Slot, because of the ongoing process and because essentially he's a manager, he can't really come out and praise Curtis Jones for getting involved in a fight and getting himself sent off. However, as I mentioned in the previous takeaway, there was a lot of emphasis put on the fight, the togetherness, Slot mentioned, between the team and the fans. So, reading between the lines, you can probably guess that Slot was actually quite pleased with the fight that he saw from Curtis Jones, even if he's not allowed to say so. One thing he did say he was very pleased with, though, is his performance on the pitch. And for Curtis, that actually might end up being a lot more important. Obviously, he's going to be missing for this Wolves game through that one-game suspension, but there are plenty of other games coming up, and Slot does feel like he is very inclined to use him. He wanted to start him against Plymouth. Obviously, he's still recovering from the knock that he had, but you do get the impression that this isn't going to be an incident that costs him when it comes to further minutes down the line. Slot made reference to the fact that the midfield wasn't really working before he came on. Once he came onto the pitch, it was the only time he ever felt comfort and some semblance of control. And if you look at the way the midfield played, there was a stat that I found and I used on the Josh Williams Distance Covered podcast. Go out and download that if you do want to hear some good Liverpool content. Go and get that. But the stat was, Liverpool made 546 passes in that game against Everton. Only 5 of them were from the starting midfielders to the starting forwards, in as much as there was a massive disconnect from that midfield line to the forward line. Incidentally, all 5 of those passes were Szoboszlai to Salah, in case you were wondering. But when Curtis Jones came onto the pitch, he was able to kind of get some fluency going. He was able to make some passes. I believe he completed all 10 of his 10 passes. He was also the first Liverpool player to have a shot in the second half, and that shot was deflected into the path of Mo Salah for him to give Liverpool the lead. So he was able to gain some added impetus, or inject some added impetus into the game. And the interesting thing for me, another stat that came out before the game, that was the first time that Liverpool had put out a non-English side, a side with no English players in it, in the top flight. But the 2 Scousers who entered the pitch, they both made a big impact. And this is something that we've seen previously from Liverpool managers, whereby you can look at it and say, well, the Premier League's a global league now. English players in these kind of games don't matter so much. Everybody understands what it means to play a derby. We've all been around the block long enough. We've all seen how these games go down. It shouldn't need to have an Englishman in there to be able to show what it really means. But clearly, it still matters to have Scousers in this game. And it's something that Rafa Benitez always used to do. He always used to pick all of the Liverpool-born players for whenever we go up against Liverpool, against Everton. Even when we played Tranmere in the FA Cup back in 2001, you saw him throw all of the Scousers into the team. Now, don't get me wrong, we had some good ones back then, and we've got some good ones now, and quality is still important. But that ability of Curtis Jones to be able to go into those hostile atmospheres and still play his football, still look to be progressive, still look to be creative, those are the kind of things that may well end up benefiting him going down the stretch. Because I think most people will still agree that Gravenberch, McAllister and Szoboszlai is the first choice midfield right now. But those qualities that Curtis Jones showed against Everton may well be prioritised in some future fixtures to come. Obviously, there's the return derby at Anfield on the 2nd of April, but I'm thinking maybe also away at Manchester City, at home against Newcastle. Both those games coming up, both of those are going to be potentially hot atmospheres, potentially ferocious games where you need to have a cool head and be able to meet fire with fire but still play your football. I wonder whether or not Arne Slot is now thinking about using Curtis Jones in those moments. So, while he may be kicking his heels against Wolves, I'm sure he's probably got a bit of a pat on the back from his manager at some point. Now, speaking of the manager, it's time for us to go into exactly the question that I asked Arne Slot, which was a little bit about those midfielders and the lack of connection between them and the forwards. Hi Arne, you mentioned about the improvement in midfield after the substitutions, and in the early going, the starting midfielders, I think I only managed to make 5 passes to the starting forwards, so there was a real disconnect between the midfield and the forward line. You also mentioned the high foul count, which is quite strange for a team that had so much ball possession to have so many more fouls than their opponents. Do you think that that played a part, the way that the game was being officiated, meant maybe some of the midfielders felt they couldn't make those kind of passes into their forwards?
No, I didn't. I only said that a part of our game plan was to prevent them from playing a lot of long balls. But it's difficult to prevent the goalkeeper from playing a long ball, and it's difficult if they get a free kick because it's not allowed to stay 1 meter in front of the ball. So they are able then to play the ball long, and I liked the way we defended that. So I haven't said anything about the way it was officiated, is that the word you used? But it was clear that our midfielders were, and the whole team weren't able to bring our attackers in a lot of promising positions, because I think we scored 2 goals and maybe we created 2.5 chances. So again, it shows you the quality of our finishing. But I would have acted different, loved to act differently after the game. I would have loved us to play the game in a different way, but it's so hard to play the game in a different way if you face the circumstances we faced and the playing style we faced. So that's why I was happy that we coped with that playing style in such a good manner.
Now, there's been a few instances this season where I felt like Slot has kind of misunderstood my question, or maybe one word within the question has led him in a different direction that I intended. And this was another one of those times. He kind of got hooked into the phrase where I mentioned about the officiating and how the game was officiated. And I believe that he thought that I thought that he had said something negative about the officiating, and as we've mentioned previously, there is an ongoing process, so it makes sense that he would look to shut down anything that made it look like he was unhappy with the officiating, at least until after that hearing is over. But as I say, that wasn't really what I was trying to get at. I was more trying to think about how the influence of those foul count was being played out with the midfielders, whether they felt like they were unwilling to play those progressive balls or dangerous balls into midfield towards their forwards, or whether they were simply unable because of the way that Everton played. And Slot did reference the way that Everton played, again, their tactics and their application, and he gave them credit for making it difficult for his team, but he also felt like his team dealt with it well overall. And again, you look at 97 minutes 30 seconds, Liverpool are 2-1 up. It's hard to argue with him that they did deal with it well. However, I do think that there is an argument to say that even in those hostile atmospheres, even when everything seems to be going against you, you would like to see a little bit more attack. You'd like to see a little bit more creativity. It was Liverpool's lowest recorded XG of the season, the first time in a league game that the opponents had a higher XG than Liverpool. As we mentioned, there was only 4 shots on target. Slot himself said that they created 2.5 chances and scored 2 goals, which he painted as a credit to the finishing of the forwards. But, you know, he's always going to put a positive spin on things. That's his job. I do think that deep down he would be quite surprised by that stat around how many passes from the midfield went to the forwards, and it's not something that he'd want to repeat. Whether or not it is more to do with the specific circumstances of that game, I'm not entirely sure. So how worried he should or is about it, we'll have to wait and see. But again, sometimes when you're coming up with these questions, you think you've got a really good subject for the manager to pull his teeth down into, and it doesn't always end up being that way. Sometimes that's on me. We'll have to go again next time. Speaking of next time, that's all we have for this press conference review. So I want to say thank you once again for watching as ever. You can find me at all the usual places. I will run through them all again. I'm going to be recording the late challenge on Monday. You will be able to see that here on YouTube, or come and follow us on Patreon and get a whole extra show. There will be a match report from the Wolves game. I will be in attendance, so that will be there on my Substack. This video will also be available as a podcast on that Substack, so if you prefer to listen rather than watch, and to be honest, if you've got this far into the video and that's the case, fair play to you. But if you do want to listen, or you know people who may want to listen to it rather than watch, they can do it over there on Substack. My This is Anfield column, there's going to be another one coming in the next couple of weeks. But if you want to go back and find what I've been writing about there, you can do. And of course, the Anfield Wrap isn't always constant in my life, and it should be in your lives too. I want to give another shout out for my US tour. I'm going to be going to America during the March international break. I will be in Boston on Wednesday, March 19th. I'll be in New York on Friday, March 21st. And I'll be in Philadelphia on Sunday, March the 23rd. At which point, I'm kind of hoping that they stop celebrating winning the Super Bowl. Although, to be fair, I'm not sure they will have done. So, these are all the places that you can go and find me. Go out there, do your best. And while I'm here, I want to give another thank you to all of you who've been so supportive of this channel and trying to help it grow. All of you out there who comment on these videos, who like these videos, who subscribe, who tell their friends about them. It all matters. It all makes a big difference. Although, one thing I have noticed, for some reason, the midweek videos tend to be a lot more popular than the weekend videos. Now, YouTube tells me that most of my subscribers are actually online from Friday afternoons. So, most of you should be out there ready, willing, and looking for exactly a video like this. So, it'll be interesting to see whether or not you find this video this Friday. And if there is some other reason why you aren't necessarily watching these videos at the weekend that you are in midweek, let me know. I'm all ears. Thank you. See you again soon.